Today we are in Ohio's Tuscarawas County at the site of one of the grisliest events of the American Revolutionary War. An event so heinous that President Theodore Roosevelt later called it a stain on frontier character that the lapse of time cannot wash away. This story is about the Lenape Native Americans who adopted a Christian pacifist way of life, only to be caught in the middle between two military powers. Now, in previous videos, I've hinted that some content would not be for the faint of heart. Today I'm saying younger viewers probably shouldn't be present for its viewing. It's time for the tale of the Moravian Massacre, a story that represents the worst of us, but one that needs to be told and remembered. So if you're curious, let's take a walk through history. During the American Revolutionary War, the Lenape, also called Delaware, Native Americans, were deeply divided over which side, if any, to take in the conflict. Many Lenape had migrated west to the Ohio Territory from the mid-Atlantic coast and resettled in what is now the towns of Coshocton, Schoenbrunn, Janadenhutton, and Salem. Their villages lay nearly halfway between the American military outpost at Fort Pitt in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the British, with Native American allies, at Fort Detroit in the Michigan Territory. Neither the British nor the Americans trusted the Lenape due to their neutrality during the war. American militia suspected the Lenape might be helping Native American raiders, while the British suspected them of feeding intelligence to the Americans at Fort Pitt. By May 1772, missionary David Zeisberger had begun converting many Lenape into Moravian Christians whose beliefs revolved around pacifism and appeasement. But even this new faith could not sway some Lenape from joining the British side in the battle, in part because of American raids against other friendly natives. In response, American Colonel David Broadhead led an expedition out of Fort Pitt in 1781 and destroyed Coshocton. Colonel Broadhead convinced the militia to leave the Lenape at Moravian villages alone, since they remained peaceful and neutral. In August of 1781, a large war party of Western natives led by a British officer arrived at the villages, attempting to persuade the Moravians to move to the Detroit area and demanding that the missionaries be turned over to them. Eventually, the Western natives captured several of the missionaries, including Zeisberger. The British officer eventually released them, but continued to pressure the Moravians to depart as the warlike natives from the northwest destroyed crops, livestock, and possessions at will. The Moravians finally agreed to abandon Schoenbrunn, Janadenhutton, and Salem, leaving a large portion of their possessions behind. Arriving in Captive Town near Fort Detroit, the Moravians began to put up huts and houses for the winter. Though they were promised a secure and bountiful home along the Sandusky River, the Western natives made no provisions to feed or house the Moravians, who now faced a desperate situation and the prospect of starvation over the winter. In February 1782, more than 150 Moravians were allowed to return to their old villages to harvest crops and collect stored food that they had been forced to leave behind. On March 4th, after hearing of the natives' return to the Tuscarawas Valley, a Pennsylvania raiding party of 160 militia, led by Lieutenant Colonel David Williamson, marched towards Janadenhutton. And when the Americans arrived, they first saw Joseph Shibosh, a Christian who was the son of a Welsh man and a Moravian woman. He was brutally murdered by the militia despite having pleaded for his life before them. Once the militia arrived here in Janadenhutton, they acted friendly toward the Moravian natives in order to gain their trust. The natives fed the colonial militia, who had promised they would take them to Fort Pitt, where they would be safe. The militia secured the natives' hunting rifles and hatchets, and some militia journeyed to the settlement in Salem, where they acted friendly towards those natives and persuaded them to come back with them to Janadenhutton. When the party returned from Salem, the soldiers bound the Moravians and accused them of taking part in Native American raids into Pennsylvania. And even though the Moravians, who again were Christian pacifists, refuted the charges, the militia held a council and voted to kill them anyway. After the natives were told of the militia's vote, they requested time to prepare for death and spent the night praying to God and singing hymns. The Moravians were held in two buildings, one for men and the other for women and children. While the natives were worshiping, the Pennsylvania militia spent the night getting drunk on stolen communion wine. The following morning, the militia tied the natives, stunned them with mallet blows to the head, and killed them with fatal scalping cuts, using the natives' own tools against them. Some of the militia refused to take part and wrung their hands, calling God to witness that they were innocent of the blood that was being spilled. They withdrew to some distance from the scene so they would no longer hear the carnage. Nathan Rollins, whose father and uncle were killed during Native American raids, took the lead in the slaughter of the Moravians. Nathan tomahawked 19 of the natives, and after it was over, sat down, cried, and said he gained no satisfaction for the loss of his father and uncle after all. While waiting to be executed, the Moravians sang hymns and prayed, with many praying for their own killers. One soldier taunted a native by pretending to offer him his hatchet, saying, "Strike me dead." When the native answered, "I strike no one dead," the soldier swung at him and chopped his arm away, all while the Moravian kept singing a hymn until another blow split his head.
A Moravian ancestor related the following. One after another, men, women, and children were led out to a block prepared for the dreadful purpose. And being commanded to sit down, the axe of the butcher in the hands of the infuriate demons clave their skulls. 2 persons who were present at that time, and who related to me the fearful story, assured me that they were unable to witness but for a short time the horrid scene. One of these men stated that when he saw the incarnate fiends lead a pretty little girl, about 12 years of age, to the fatal block, he heard her plead for her life in the most piteous accent, till her innocent voice was hushed in death. He felt a faintness come over him, and could no longer stand the heart-sickening scene. The dreadful work of human slaughter continued till every prayer and moan and sigh was hushed in the stillness of death. No sex, age, or condition was spared, from the gray-haired sire to the infant at his mother's breast. All fell victim to the most cold-blooded murder ever perpetrated by man. There lay in undistinguished confusion, gashed and gory, in that cellar, were they who were thrown by their butchers, nearly 100 murdered Christian Indians, hurried to an untimely grave by those who had but 2 days before sworn to protect them.
When the brutality was over, the militia had murdered and scalped 28 men, 29 women, and 39 children. The militia piled the bodies in the mission buildings and burned the village to the ground. 2 Moravian boys survived to tell the tale of the massacre. Sometime later, Christian missionary John Heckwelder collected the remains of the Moravian martyrs and buried them in a mound at the southern side of the village. Many of the soldiers who participated in the slaughter denied their involvement, and their descendants also refused to acknowledge their actions. At the time of the massacre, although many settlers were outraged by it, frontier residents generally supported the militia's actions. No criminal charges were filed. However, as the details of the Moravian Massacre became known, it was eventually recognized as a crime against humanity.
In 1811, during a negotiation to settle land boundaries, Shawnee Chief Tecumseh reminded future President William Henry Harrison of America's lies and deceit, saying, quote, "You recall the time when the Jesus Indians of the Delawares lived near the Americans, and had confidence in their promises of friendship, and thought they were secure. Yet the Americans murdered all the men, women, and children, even as they prayed to Jesus.
This 37-foot tall monument to the Moravian martyrs was dedicated on June 5th, 1872. The inscription reads, "Here triumphed in death 90 Christian Indians, March 8, 1782. There are reports of spirits walking around these grounds. How could there not be? Such an event would surely burn its image into the fabric of time and space at this location. Ghostly orbs following visitors, dark shadows peering from behind the buildings, and spirits whispering in your ears are just some of the reported haunts. But the most noteworthy incident happened to a former Janadenhutton resident on a cold winter's day. The former resident claims that as he stood near the burial mound, he felt the earth move beneath his feet. And then he heard a faint song, a hymn if you will, echoing nearby. As he moved away from the mound, he glanced back to see mist rising from the top of the burial. The mist soon took the shape of a little boy, dark eyes staring back at him, sad and full of grief, his black hair caked in blood. The boy vanished as quickly as it appeared, and immediately the eyewitness felt a searing pain on his scalp. I urge you to come to Janadenhutton for yourself and experience this historic place where so many died senselessly. These are the parts of history that need remembered and passed down through generations so they will never, ever occur again. Thanks for watching today, folks. Seems a bit ridiculous to mention social media and all of that stuff, so I'll just leave you with this. I'll see you next time as we explore more curious history. Take care.